Mukiwa Book Audit, what Peter Godwin's memoir can and cannot tell us about Rhodesia. This is the Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk. Today we are conducting a book audit of Peter Godwin's Mukiwa. The Kopje Journal and Review conducts book audits because we treat memoirs and novels as structural evidence, not only as literature. A book audit from the Kopje Journal and Review does not summarize the plot. It examines the political world that produced the book, the systems operating inside it, and what the text reveals about memory, power, and historical displacement. We are not using Mukiwa just to retell a Rhodesian coming-of-age story. The Kopje Journal and Review reads this memoir as an archive of formation, a study of how an unequal political system becomes ordinary inside childhood, before the child has the language to question it. By the end of this episode, you should understand why Mukiwa remains one of the most discussed memoirs about white childhood, war, and return in Rhodesia and Zimbabwe, why its value is real but limited, and why it should be read as one positioned witness, not as Zimbabwe explained. If you are new here and value serious book audits, African literary analysis, and careful cultural criticism, please subscribe to the Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk for more book, film, history, and cultural memory audits that help explain Zimbabwe, South Africa, and the wider African experience. Mukiwa is not a neutral history of Zimbabwe. It is not an official record of Rhodesia, the Liberation War, independence, or Gukurahundi. It is a memoir, and that distinction governs how the book must be evaluated. Memoir gives the reader proximity. It gives texture, atmosphere, sequence, and emotional memory. But memoir also gives the reader a position. The narrator sees from somewhere, remembers from somewhere, and belongs to a particular household, race, school system, class position, geography, and later professional route. That is why Mukiwa should not be worshipped, and it should not be thrown away. It should be placed. Peter Godwin writes from the position of a white child growing up in Rhodesia, then as a young man caught inside the security world of the war, and later as a journalist returning to Zimbabwe. That position gives the book its power, and it also gives the book its limits. The power is that the reader sees how a racial state can become ordinary inside childhood. The limit is that this is not the childhood of most Zimbabweans. That tension is the audit. The first thing Mukiwa does well is record formation. The book is strong because it does not begin with a political lecture. It begins with remembered childhood. In a specific regional world, Silverstream, Umtali, Melsetto, Chipinge, Biriwiri, Cashel, and the Mozambique border, these are not decorative place names. They are the action world of Godwin's childhood memory. That geography is important because it keeps the book rooted in real dirt. This is not a generic Rhodesia. It is an Eastern Highlands and Manicaland world of estate roads, rural clinics, schools, police stations, labour compounds, mountain weather, borderland movement, and long trips through difficult terrain. He hears names, categories, and official language before he can decode the system behind them. This is where Mukiwa is most useful. It shows Rhodesia not only as parliament and flag, but as a daily arrangement of who moves freely and who carries papers, who is named formally and who is known only by a first name, and ultimately, who is protected by the state versus who is managed by it. That is the book's first major contribution. It makes the political system visible through ordinary childhood detail. But this is also where the reader must be careful. The vividness of childhood does not make the childhood politically innocent. A child may not understand the system, but the child can still benefit from the system. A household can feel loving and familiar while being located inside a racial order. Memory can be tender and structurally compromised at the same time. That is why Mukiwa works best when read slowly. Not because every memory must be prosecuted, but because every memory has a location. The second thing Mukiwa does well is show closeness without equality. One of the book's strongest features is its proximity to African workers, patients, domestic, employees, rural communities, and religious life. The memoir is not written from an entirely sealed white world. African adults are present in the child's life. They feed, teach, protect, frighten, guide, tease, and shape him. That presence complicates the book and keeps it from becoming a simple colonial nostalgia text. But the complication does not erase the hierarchy. Closeness is not equality. Domestic intimacy is not social justice. Knowing words from another language is not the same thing as sharing power. Growing up around African adults does not mean growing up inside African history. The estate world is where this contradiction becomes especially clear. Silverstream is not only home, it is also a production system. The wattle estate, the factory, the labor routines, the domestic household, and the rural medical circuits all sit inside a colonial economy that produces comfort for some people and labor obligation for others. This is where the land ledger has to return. At independence in 1980, about 6,000 white farmers owned roughly 42% of Zimbabwe's land. That number is not a decoration beside the memoir, it is the structural background beneath the childhood landscape. A child can remember a farm road warmly, while the land system beneath that road remains unjust. That is the tension Mukiwa forces the reader to hold. The book gives the reader genuine proximity, but it also reveals how unequal that proximity was. African life enters the white household, but the white household still sits in a privileged structure. African labor supports the estate, the clinic, the home, and the wider rural economy, but the terms of that world are not equal. This is where the book has value for Zimbabwean viewers. It helps explain why some Rhodesian memories can sound emotionally sincere and politically incomplete at the same time. A person can honestly remember kindness, beauty, fear, and belonging. But sincerity does not settle the ledger. The third thing Mukiwa does well is show how war enters ordinary institutions. The book moves through school, medicine, estate labor, road travel, police procedure, national service, and journalism. That movement gives the memoir a wider institutional field than a closed childhood story. The school environment becomes crucial evidence of how children absorb emergency conditions before they can fully explain them. The 11th of November 1965, the date of Ian Smith's unilateral Declaration of Independence, becomes one anchor for that shift. The child does not necessarily grasp the constitutional meaning, but the school world eventually absorbs the consequences: security routines, emergency thinking, fear, games, and imagination. Medicine becomes evidence of care and inequality operating in the same space. Godwin's mother's medical work takes the book into rural clinics, African patient queues, vaccination work, family planning, and the borderland movement of Andau communities between Rhodesia and Mozambique. Estate labor becomes evidence of production and hierarchy. The child can see trucks, workers, factory systems, fire crews, and ledgers as part of a living rural world, while the adult reader must also see the labor structure beneath that world. Police material becomes evidence of the narrator's movement from observation into participation. The boy who watches adult systems later enters the security world himself. Journalism becomes evidence of the later attempt to document post-independence violence. This is a strong arc for a memoir, not because it tells the whole truth of Zimbabwe, but because it shows one life moving through several systems. The child sees the system, the young man serves inside the system, and the journalist later reports on another state system after independence. That progression gives Mukiwa its moral discomfort. The narrator is not only a witness from outside history, he is also someone formed by history, used by history, and later trying to understand history. The book's best value is not innocence, its best value is implication. The fourth thing Mukiwa does well is refuse a clean ending. A weaker memoir could have ended with white Rhodesian loss and treated that as the whole tragedy. Mukiwa continues into independent Zimbabwe and into the violence of the early 1980s. Zimbabwe became independent on the 18th of April 1980. Independence changed names, offices, allegiances and public legitimacy. Salisbury became Harare, Umtali became Mutare, Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. But a changed flag did not automatically produce a just state. This is where Mukiwa becomes uncomfortable for more than one audience. It does not redeem Rhodesia. It does not cancel independence. It does not say colonial. Rule was justified, but it insists that post-independence power must also be examined. The book's movement into Matabeleland and Gukurahundi prevents it from becoming only a white childhood elegy. Gukurahundi is generally associated with the 1983 to 1987 period, and that date range is a necessary anchor because it separates early independent state violence from the liberation war itself. The early independence. Material forces the reader to face a different problem. A liberation movement can defeat an unjust order and still build coercive practices of its own. That is not an argument against independence. It is an argument against treating independence as the end of accountability. For the Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk, this is one of the book's strongest contributions. Mukiwa helps hold two truths together. Rhodesia was structurally unjust, and independent Zimbabwe still had to be judged by what it did with power. Those two statements do not cancel each other. They belong together. Now the limits. The first limit is obvious but important. Mukiwa is not black rural memory, farm worker memory, domestic worker memory, liberation war testimony, women's household memory, teacher memory, nurse memory, township memory, or Matabeleland testimony. Those voices may appear inside the book, but they do not control the book. That is the central boundary. Mukiwa can show how African life entered Godwin's world. It cannot become African memory itself. This is why the book should never be used as a substitute for Zimbabwean testimony from other positions. It should be read beside those accounts, not above them. The second limit is that memoir produces strong images, and strong images can mislead. But a memoir scene is not a census, a national sample, a policy dataset, or the full social field. This does not make the scene worthless. It means the reader must use it correctly. A scene can show what one person saw, how a system appeared from one household, and how fear, habit, affection, or contradiction is felt in memory. A scene cannot carry the burden of explaining Zimbabwe by itself. That is why this episode remains a book audit. We are evaluating Mukiwa as a book. The third limit is that Godwin's later mobility shapes the book's authority. He is not only remembering from inside Rhodesia, he is also writing as someone who later became a journalist and author, with access to international publishing, international readers, and global narrative authority. Some witnesses travel farther than others. Some memories become books. Some memories remain in families, some memories stay in villages, some memories never reach a publisher. So the question is not only whether Mukiwa is well written, the question is also why this memory traveled so far, while other Zimbabwean memories traveled less. That is not an accusation. It is a publishing reality. Mukiwa became one of the books through which many outsiders encountered Rhodesia and Zimbabwe. That influence requires scrutiny. The fourth limit is emotional framing. Because Mukiwa is vivid, some readers may use it to return to Rhodesia sentimentally. Other readers may reject it immediately because of the narrator's position. Both readings are too easy. A serious reading must do more work. It must ask what the book reveals intentionally and unintentionally. It must ask how the child's world was built, who supported that world, what the narrator could see, what he could not see, and what he only understood later. It must also ask why the book remains compelling. The answer is not simply that the book is controversial, Mukiwa has lasted because it is a well-structured memoir of formation, implication, loss, return, and witness. It gives readers a strong narrative path through a morally unstable world, but lasting does not mean complete. That is the balance. So how should Zimbabweans read Mukiwa today? Read it as memoir. Read it as positioned witness. Read it as white Rhodesian. Childhood remembered after the world that produced it collapsed. Read it as a record of proximity without equality. Read it as evidence of how a child can be formed by a system before he can question it. Read it as a book that sees some things clearly and cannot see other things fully. But do not read it as Zimbabwe explained. Do not let one eloquent witness become the whole national archive. Mukiwa belongs on the shelf, but it should not sit alone. It should be read beside Black Zimbabwean memoir, liberation war testimony, rural memory, farm worker memory, women's household memory, Matabeleland testimony, township history, teacher and nurse memory, and diaspora reflection. That is the right placement. The final takeaway is simple. Mukiwa matters because it records how Rhodesia entered a child's life before the child had the language to understand Rhodesia. Its strength is formation. Its weakness is position. Its value is witness. Its danger is overuse. For the Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk, the responsible reading is not to cancel the book and not to crown it. The responsible reading is to place it. Mukiwa is Peter Godwin's memoir. It is not Zimbabwe's complete memory. That is why the viewer should still read the book, but read it with discipline. Thank you for spending this time with the Kopje Journal and Review Arts Desk. Now tell us, how should Zimbabweans read Mukiwa today? What does it preserve well, and which Zimbabwean voices should be read beside it? Let us know in the comments. We read all comments. If you value serious book audits, author examinations, and African literary analysis, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss what is coming.